Okay, so this series of lectures, we're going to talk about money. And at one level, we all know what money is, of course. But, of course, economists are also going to go ahead and make it more complicated than that. Money is the set of assets that are routinely used to settle transactions. And this gets at what's called the first purpose of money, which is that money is a medium of exchange. It's how people do exchanges. But a little bit more subtly, because we're so used to it, money also serves two different purposes out there. It's what's called the unit of account. That is, money is how we measure prices and values. The other third purpose of money that we talk about is that money is a store of value, that money allows us to transport purchasing power over time. And in many ways, sort of slightly going back, but money again is an asset. That means it's a thing you can own. It has value. And all assets, we would be interested in how they perform on three different dimensions. One is their liquidity. Liquidity is the idea of how easily something can be converted to money. And obviously, money is totally liquid because it's already money. It doesn't have to be converted. And by easily here, we mean both time and expense. So if you look at something like a house is an asset, but it's a pretty illiquid asset. It takes a considerable amount of time to sell a house, and it also is a fairly expensive proposition. The second thing we're interested in about an asset is its expected rate of return. And chapter 14 went into a lot of detail about this, and of course, we know this could be either real or nominal rate of return. And then the last thing here is its riskiness or variability. How uncertain is that rate of return? So different assets perform well or badly on some of these dimensions. It's rare that an asset is highly liquid and has a really high rate of return, and it's really low risk. Usually an asset performs well on one of these characteristics, but not so well on the other characteristics. There are different types of money out there. When sort of things got started historically, we were usually dealing with what was called a commodity money. So one of the most common early commodity monies were animals. So it might be that, if you were going to pay your dowry or you were going to buy a bow off someone or something like that, it would be a certain number of sheep or cows or something like that. And this is still to some extent used today in some cultures that are sort of nomadic cultures. But obviously, most cultures are no longer using livestock as their means of currency. It also actually happens in frontier societies, where, for instance, during the early days of the American colonies, tobacco leaves might be used as currency when the colonists were trading with each other, or beaver skins or something like that. So, after a while, most societies then fixate on a particular type of commodity, precious metal, silver, or gold typically. And some societies were more fixated on silver in East Asia. Gold was the more common currency in Western Europe, but more or less the same idea. You can see how this is a particular type of commodity. Commodities, they're useful, and you always have the fallback of smoking the tobacco or eating the cow or whatever, but they don't perform very well as a medium of exchange because it takes a lot of effort to transport cows or 100 pounds of tobacco leaf from place to place, and they may or may not perform well as a store of value either. As a unit of account, it would be desirable if all the units had the same quality level. And that might not be true of tobacco or cows. It might be that, different batches of tobacco leaf were more or less high quality than others, or some cows were, more muscular and had more meat on them, and some were sick, and so on and so forth. So one of the advantages of precious metals is that you can produce it into a standardized level of purity and standardized weights, and obviously those are what we call coins. Eventually, of course, after a long, long time, people started discovering paper money. And paper money initially emerged as receipts for hard currency. Hard currency is sometimes called specie. I don't know what the origin of that term is, but the hard currency would sometimes, you would take it to a bank and they would give you a receipt that said you had deposited 100 gold coins, and then that eventually morphed into paper money, backed by specie, and then eventually people dropped the link to the gold and silver altogether, and we have what's called fiat currency. And fiat means essentially by command, and this is currency because the government says it's so, and it's basically not backed by anything. And, once upon a time, before the Great Depression, there was a true gold standard, and dollar bills and British pounds and French francs could be traded in for a certain amount of gold. And then once we got to the Great Depression, everyone went off the gold standard, at least in a sort of actual way. There was still some token linked to gold. The token linked to gold persisted until the early 1970s, and since the early 1970s we've been on a fiat currency system. So pretty much every country in the world that I'm aware of right now uses a fiat currency system, and that's where we are.